Good morning, everybody. This is your presentation for writing assignment number 5, the final assignment in our course this spring. The oral presentation version of your Big Brother research paper. When I first started in professional writing and in the business world, we had reports. Everyone would sit around a table and we would have these elaborate folders with handouts from Kinko's and that we'd had printed up, and it really was a mess. And as time has gone on, professionally, I'm seeing more and more when we want to relay information, we're relying on PowerPoint or Prezi or Google Slides. And there are some things that you want to do as not just a student who's giving oral presentations, but as an adult in the work, force. You want to do things that add to your ethos as a worker and show yourself to be a good collapser, summarizer, and paraphraser of information. So today's presentation is meant to not just go for your writing assignment number 5, but to carry with you way into the future as you go to different things in the work world and you're giving all these presentations. Here's some tips from somebody who's been a professional presenter for 30 years. So when we're dealing with oral presentations in any format, whether it's 2 people, if we start to go more and more to this distance learning format, we're going to need to make sure that we understand what the parameters are. So when you're dealing with oral presentations, you really have 4 variables you're working with. You're working with yourself, the speaker. You're working with the material that you've written or were given to present. You're working inside the setting. And then, of course, you're working with your audience. So let's start with you, the speaker. Everybody gets nervous when you have to do some sort of public speaking thing. Even grizzled old professionals like myself, I still get nervous the first day of class. I still get nervous when I have a big presentation that a lot of, sort of resources are relying on. So when we talk about controlling nervousness, I want to tell you that as someone who put her way through college as a musician, I was a professional musician for many years. I still play. But I learned a really important thing about being a musician, which is simply this. If you want to not be nervous, be prepared. It's my experience that when I don't practice, so for instance, like hymns for church, if I don't practice those hymns for church, I go in to play for the congregation and I'm very nervous and I feel like I might puke on something and I generally do a bad job. But if I practice and practice and I'm prepared, my nervousness slips away and I'm able to focus on the importance of the message of the moment. So people have some crazy ideas about how to control their nervousness. First of all, don't self-medicate. That's a terrible idea. Doing a shot of Jagermeister to take the edge off or a couple of bongs before you come in is a super bad idea. We can tell you're wasted. So don't do that. Probably one of the worst examples I've ever seen of this was a young person who was so nervous about their presentation that they took a Xanax before, they had to give their turn. And the student was so doped up and so slow that it was very difficult for all of us to last through her 45-minute long presentation. So don't self-medicate, practice. And the third thing about nervousness has to do with see yourself doing it. Don't practice in front of a mirror. We automatically self-correct when we do things in front of a mirror because we're getting real-time feedback in the mirror. So what you want to do is make sure that you practice your presentation with your webcam, with your phone, however it is you're going to do that. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But if you practice in front of the actual video function that you're using, then you can watch yourself on camera and you can figure out what you need to do to improve. You need to know your audience. This is one of the reasons that I encourage students to get to know each other in class, because it's a lot easier to stand up and yak in front of a bunch of friends than a bunch of people you don't know. So reason 8,471 to make a friend in class is that you know your audience. professionally, when I'm out there in work world giving speeches or presentations, I make a real point of showing up 10 or 20 minutes early and getting to know some of the people I'm going to be speaking with. I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to ask somebody the question, "Hey, how was your ride in today? What's the weather like from where you're from?" These basic sort of get to know you kind of things. And if the members of your audience sort of know you before you present and you know them, that nervousness kind of goes down a little bit. The secret of being a really good speaker is to be reasonable, to be confident, and to be enthusiastic to an appropriate level of your topic. And if you're talking something super serious like, the death rates in African American women who don't have access to good health care, then you don't want to be all happy and smiley. You got to adjust your enthusiasm for your topic. One of the ultimate things that you don't want to do as a speaker is preach at your audience, which is kind of funny because that's kind of what I'm doing now. But I had the example I wanted to tell you guys was I had a section that was a young party group, and this was 10 years ago. But this group, they were young, they liked to party, they were drinkers, they were boaters, they were all friends, and there was a lot of talk about parties and kegs and drinking and whatnot in this section. There was an older lady, more my age, who was a little uptight. That was part of this section. And she decided to do her final paper on why binge drinking in young adults is harmful, which is a really great topic. But the problem was, when she got up to do her presentation, she starts it off like this. "You did it. You did it. You've done it. You've all done it. You've all broken the law. You're all sinners." And then she proceeds to launch into her presentation. But by that point, her audience was completely shut down. They didn't want to be preached at. So it's very important that you don't wag your finger in your audience's face and say, "You should, think this way." So in addition to sort of the basics of controlling your nervousness and being practiced and rehearsed, a big part of your presentation is your nonverbal communicators. So what are the nonverbal parts that we're communicating? It's our facial expressions. These are nearly universal, very interestingly. Frowns kind of mean the same thing the world over. Your gestures, your paralinguistic inflection, your pitch, your rhythm, your volume, in my case, your Texan accent, your body language, of course, your proxemics, and that's how close or near you are to the audience that you're presenting to. Eye gazing, which is one of those things, the magic secret, by the way, with making eye contact with an audience is don't look at anyone longer than 3 seconds. Just go to them, make eye contact, give it a count of 3, and then move on. Because if you keep staring any longer than that at someone, it makes that someone very uncomfortable, and it kind of makes you look like a psycho. So the other thing is your haptics, where you're communicating through touch. I think that's probably not really appropriate for our current level of how we interact in society. So you've got to be real careful with that. Touching audience members is usually something that the audience freaks out about. And then, of course, your appearance, the scary one, right? So I want to take a little nonverbal situation and walk you through it so that you can sort of see how people miss nonverbal cues and how sometimes what the nonverbal thing is going on is much more important than the verbal thing that's going on. So there's a situation, okay? So there's a party, and at this party, there's a cute guy, and Sheila walked up to him so that she could hit on him. And when she did that, he turned his shoulders slightly away. What does it mean when someone turns their shoulders slightly away? But Sheila being Sheila, she keeps eyeballing him. So Sheila's friend looks at her and makes a slicing motion to her throat. When we do that, that means cut it out, right? But Sheila still hasn't gotten the message. She turns to the fella and says hello, and the fella says, "Hi, my name is Terrence, and I'm getting ready to leave," in a rushed and high-pitched tone of voice. So when someone speaks in a rushed or high-pitched tone of voice, it tends to communicate negativity. It communicates non-compliance with whatever it is you're trying to get this person to do. Then, eye gazing. He stared carefully over the tops of the heads of party guests. When we want to avoid something, we look away from it. So this is why you need to make eye contact with your audience rather than staring over their heads. He reached out and placed his hand on Sheila's shoulder. Of course, Sheila's thrilled, right? And we place our hands on people's shoulders, usually to get their attention, right? That's a haptic that, especially in today's political context, probably should not be done at all. He pushed himself slightly back from Sheila. What does that mean when someone pushes themselves back? So he's turned his shoulders away. Her friend has made a nonverbal cut-it-out motion. He's given her a clue in his voice what's going on. He's avoiding her gaze and making eye contact. He's pushing himself back. And then, finally, Sheila notices his black coat and white collar. The cute guy Sheila was hitting on was a priest. She was trying to, non-verbally communicate with someone who was trying non-verbally to tell her that her hitting on him wasn't a good idea. Non-verbal tends to carry the message more so than verbal stuff. So here's some basic principles. Part of our nonverbal communication is deliberate, and part of it is unconscious. So the best way to make all of your nonverbal communications deliberate is to practice. Once again, the P word, practice. Facial expressions tend to have nonverbal signals, but things like the taco chop, the point, the he's crazy message where you take your finger and you twirl it around in your ear, those do not have universal meaning across cultures and languages. Facial expressions do, but all the other stuff from the neck down kind of doesn't. So when you have a verbal and a nonverbal message and the two conflict, we tend to believe the nonverbal. Anyone who's had a young child in their home that lies to them knows what this is about. And then, the problem with not having good nonverbal communication is that your message is obscured, and people tend to be more focused on what you're doing rather than what you're saying. So when you're done with this particular presentation, you're going to watch a video of a girl from Britain doing her presentation. Notice how hostile her body language is. Her turning her back, her flipping her hair. And she indicates in a million ways non-verbally that she's not happy with what she has to do. And so as an audience, we end up, rather than listening to her good message and hearing her, we tend to turn her off because her nonverbal messages are kind of hostile. So have fun watching that video and taking a good look at her. The next variable that you deal with in an oral presentation scenario is the material, the stuff you have written. I find that no matter what your presentation's on, it's very good to work from a clear purpose statement. I'm going to use a couple of examples from your papers in class. You might have a purpose statement like this. Heart monitors are really important. I need to help my classmates understand how heart monitors can positively impact a patient's life. Or you might have something like, I need to help fellow students understand why they shouldn't pay too much for college. So when you state your objectives clearly for yourself and you say, this is what I'm going to do, it keeps you focused, keeps you from going off and telling some strange, silly story or, getting choked up. It really does help you focus your presentation. You should have an introduction, a body, a conclusion, and use the same rules for those that we've talked about with intros, bodies, and conclusions in class. You want to have something that pulls your reader's interest in. You want to have good, solid information that will involve the reader. And in that conclusion, you want to take that information and show how it might relate to your audience members on an individual basis. In other words, connect your topic, again, to the big picture. The real key to presenting is to be simple and concise. Don't try to overdo it. Less presented from a clean, lean, mean sort of mindset is much better than a babbling, unfocused, all over the place kind of presentation. So if you work from that good outline of what you're going to speak and you know your data, you can exploit your visuals, and putting all of that together, you should have a pretty good handle on your material. So on using notes, okay, I guess maybe you guys have noticed that I don't use notes. I rehearse and I practice my presentations enough that I don't need notes. I'm very lucky in that I have a pretty photographic memory and I have the extraordinary ability to recall details. So I'm lucky that way. Most folks need some notes to actually operate with. So first thing is practice with the actual notes you will use. Don't practice with notes on paper and then go in and only have your PowerPoint, or go in and have them on note cards. I'm a big believer in note cards. They're easy to handle. You can hide them behind your back. Working from pieces of paper usually is very noisy. So if you decide to use note cards, make sure you order them. Make sure you number them with great big numbers so that you can see it. So if you get out of order, you can easily get yourself back on track. My whole thing, I'm a big believer in one note card. If you're going to use note cards with just the key things that you want to remind yourself of. I think when you sort of deliberately plan what you're going to, when you're going to look at your notes and when you're not going to look at your notes, like I'm going to look at my notes at the beginning of slide 2, it gives your presentation a very practiced, professional edge. It shows that you have put deliberate time and planning into your presentation, and your audience is always going to respect you for that. So when you're using your visuals, that is your PowerPoint or a video or one of those big I literally just went totally blank there. It's like a poster board, and you're trying to explain things to people on a poster board. Always practice with your visuals. You should practice your presentation with your PowerPoint slides. Out there in work world, I always recommend having a backup plan. Anything can go wrong. Your laptop can run out of battery. The power could go out. You could have a bad plug up front where you're presenting. There's a million reasons why you might not have access to electronic data. So when I go into professional situations, I always have a printout. I always have a handout available just in case all the technology goes bad. I can have a piece of paper in front of them, and it shows that I'm prepared and I understand that sometimes things do happen. One of the things that's really critical is to move along with your visuals. If you leave the slide up on the presentation board and you're 3 or 4 slides ahead of us, it's very difficult for us to understand what is going on. Sure, light humor can be very effective in about half the situations, but as always, we want to tone our humor, our enthusiasm, and our method of presentation to the level that the topic requires. Lightweight topics get more humor. Heavyweight stuff, not any humor at all. So, I want you to use effective graphic design principles. I've loaded up a couple of links for you that I find particularly apt, useful for designing PowerPoints, including one on color psychology that I think you might find really super useful and super interesting. But when it comes down to slide, it doesn't really matter what kind of color you use or fonts or all of that. It's about readability. If your audience can't read it, then it's not worth the slide it's written on, which I really encourage. I've tried to role model for you all semester what a good, clean slideshow looks like. And you want to have big font, nice. I love, the Arial's my favorite because it's so easy to read. But you just want to have a very clean, mean, lean screen. You don't want it all decorated up like a Kentucky Derby hat. It shouldn't have all sorts of silliness on it. It should be professional, lean, mean, and clean. So another thing we need to talk about is the setting. You don't have a lot of control over this as a student, but out there in work world, you sometimes do. So the things to be aware of are the things everyone knows, that the time of day affects things. If you're going to be presenting at 3:30 in the afternoon, you better dress in bright colors and jump around and do everything you can to help your audience stay interested. If you can control the room temperature, a room that is slightly cool will keep your audience more involved than one that is warm. The same with low-level lighting. Low-level lighting tends to involve an audience, and because they can see the screen better, than one that is brightly lit. I think in professional world, the best advice I can give you is to always make sure you're friends with the maintenance man. If you do have anything go wrong in a professional work world setting, the maintenance man or woman will be the person that will help you. They will be the who knows where the light bulb is, who knows where the extension cord is. So out there in work world, always make friends with the maintenance people. And then the key thing, be prepared for anything. When you're out there speaking, I've had, power go out. I've had someone puke all over the middle of an aisle one time. The things that can happen are just absolutely crazy. So just go into any presentation with this sort of, I can be prepared for anything that might happen. When you're dealing with your audience, now luckily for you, most of your audiences will be student audiences. So you've made friends with your classmates, and that's not so bad. But out there in work world, or if you're presenting to a section of people you don't know, there's some things you can do to sort of help you interact with them in a positive way. First thing is, notice how they dress and interact with each other. If everybody's all dressed up in suits and they're being very formal with one another, then you're going to need to be formal and sort of very by the book with your presentation. On the other hand, if they all come in wearing Hawaiian shirts and they're talking about going to happy hour after the presentation, then you can be a little looser with how you treat them. The key thing is to treat them with respect, whether they deserve it or not. In your head, you might be thinking, oh my gosh, these people are horrible, but it should never show on your face. I find that audiences that are treated with respect tend to give it back. Never turn your back on an audience, ever, ever, ever. One, it's rude. But two, in today's climate, you never know what's going to happen. So in terms of just being safe, never turn your back on an audience. One thing that can really go wrong is when you're given a bunch of questions in this sort of style where the person is trying to get you, or trying to make you look stupid in front of everyone. So be sure to spend some time anticipating what questions might come up, especially out there in work world. If someone asks you a question that you do not have the answer to, don't lie. Just tell them, I don't have the answer to that right now, but if you give me your email address, I will email you the answer. And the real key is to watch their feet. If their feet are tapping and dancing around and wiggling all underneath their desks or their seats, then they're impatient. They want you to talk faster. They want it over. And if their feet are quiet and pointed toward you in an open manner, then they're probably pretty interested and you can keep talking. The key thing is to treat all audiences with respect. Another way to look at this presentation, not just here for this class, but for all presentations in the future, get rid of the word presentation. What an awful word. It sounds like you're naked in front of the village. And I like the phrase adult show and tell. I don't know if you remember this particular game from your childhood. Usually your kindergarten teacher, your first grade teacher would let you play show and tell. And you would bring something from home, your little Wooby Rabbit, and you would explain to all your friends that this was your Wooby Rabbit and you loved it. Channel your inner child. Channel that first grader. You're there to show it off and tell them what great stuff you've done. So for your presentation coming up for writing assignment number 5, and be sure to check the class announcement page for detailed assignment parameters. And then also, I have loaded up for you what I think is maybe the best student presentation of all time as a sample for you to look at, called electronic police vehicles. So it should be about 10 slides. We're going to talk about these slides individually in just a second. It should be about 7 to 10 minutes long. 11 is fine, but if you've got a 47-minute long presentation, you have gone too far. And then, of course, what you're going to do, you're going to email me that presentation, or you can send me a YouTube link. Most important thing, once again, you've got to make this deadline. I have a very quick turnaround for this assignment. I've got to get my grades in right after you turn this in because of our Friday class. So be aware that after midnight, May the 1st, I will not be accepting any assignments. All right, so the presentation itself. It should have the following elements. In those 10 slides, you should probably use about 6 to 7 slides to summarize your research paper. Do not, I repeat, do not copy and paste sections of your research paper into a slideshow. I've read the paper. I don't need to read it on the slides. What you want to do is you really want to use those questions that you used in your critical preface, the scope questions, the 4 that you thought were the most important. Use those to guide your summary. You can, just highlight the important parts of your paper. You don't need to tell us every single detail. I'm sorry, I just saw this and I'm recording, so I can't correct it. But the next thing is you want to have a slide that talks about what came easily during the project. This could be anything. It could be your communication with me. It could be learning how to do APA. It could be enjoying writing introduction, whatever it was. Be honest. I'm not grading you on what was easy or hard for you. I'm grading you on whether you actually addressed this point. Report what came with difficulty. Being aware that when you tell me what came with difficulty, you're helping out future students because I can go in and continuously fine-tune and make better what gave students difficulty. So I'm super invested in that particular slide. And then the last one, and this one also interests me. What skills did you learn in this class that you can take beyond you into work world? Was there a particular thing that you liked? So if you put those together in a sweet little PowerPoint, you should be ready to go for writing assignment number 5. As always, I'm available via email or text for questions.